Retro Now.
Hi, this is Vanessa Marshall, voice of Hera and Rook Cast, and you're listening to Dennis and Jay on Podcast Stardust. Their behavior is continually unexpected.
Welcome to Podcast Stardust. This is the fully armed and operational podcast dedicated to Star Wars news, reviews, and discussion. I'm Dennis Keithling.
And I'm Jay Krebs.
It may be Monday, but we have another episode of the Clone Wars to discuss as part of our rewatch series, so at least there's that. Before we get into that, though, Jay, I want to remind everybody what our social media contacts are.
Yes, and the Clone Wars is always a great way to start the week. So we are very conveniently found on Facebook and Instagram at Podcast Stardust.
Okay, the digital line, the signal boosted to maximum output. The Republic investigators are on the scene. The shield is down. We are now broadcasting to the galaxy. So this will be our discussion of episode 15 from season 2 of the Clone Wars, which is called Senate Murders. I think you'd like to use that Senate motif in their titles an awful lot, especially this season of the Clone Wars. But Senate Intrigue, I think, is the one most recently. But anyways, it's going to be a full spoiler discussion. And so with that, Jay, you want to go ahead and give us the episode summary, please?
Absolutely. Senator Amidala presents a motion to the Senate to halt the production of new clone troopers in the hopes that diplomacy with the Separatists could be resumed. Tragically, Senator Anaconda Farr is murdered shortly thereafter. Even though Lieutenant Devo begins an investigation, Padmé and her allies, Senators Mon Mothma and Bail Organa, not so quietly begin an investigation of their own. Kaminoan Senator Bertoni and Senator Medici are the initial suspects, but after a confrontation at the docks, Lieutenant Devo reveals Senator Farr was murdered by a poison that only affects Rhodians. Padmé uses this knowledge to conclude that Senator Lolo betrayed and murdered Senator Farr.
Look at you, one take Krebs, getting that all out without any edits or anything. So, hey, fantastic work. A lot of, well, I mean, I'm just sitting here listening to you casually mention Senator Medici without having to say it twice. And they're like, wow, these names. Okay. Yeah, so this is a Padmé-centric episode when it comes down to it. Nary an appearance of Anakin or Obi-Wan or Ahsoka, for that matter. We get to see Duchess Satine in the background at one point. But what did you think about this episode overall?
Well, it's ironic that you say, no Obi-Wan, no Anakin, no Ahsoka, because I was thinking that myself, that I was like, wow, we really haven't seen them for quite a while, which isn't necessarily a terrible thing, but it is a little, missing without them. But yeah, I mean, this is definitely an episode that highlights Padmé in her intelligence, not only with her ability to get down to the bottom of things, but also, she's that self-rescuing princess, if you will, and she takes matters into her own hands. It was great to see she and Bail working together and, trying to figure out what the heck was going on. And, just always, I think Padmé shines in this one. She demonstrated a lot of resolve, intelligence, and a lot of, political savviness. And she's definitely a very prominent character, obviously, in this episode, as well as in all of the Clone Wars.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. It's when it comes to Padmé, she is very politically savvy when understanding how the Senate works, how to navigate a lot of other senators, how to get things done. But for all of that, she really is impetuous here, which is, Anaconda Farr. Now, that is, Uncle Anno that we remember from season 1 of the Clone Wars. And so she just can't let stand that he's been murdered. And she's not going to leave it up to anybody else to do that. But again, it's just kind of Padmé goes rogue part 6. I mean, that's just the way she operates when it comes to everything.
It's true.
She understands there's laws or rules or whatever, but the fact that Lieutenant Devo shows up and tells her to stay out of it, she's like, goes in one ear and out the other when it's all said and done. So there's that. The other thing that I really appreciated on this one, look, I mean, this is not going to be in my top 10, 15 episodes of the Clone Wars. It's a perfectly good episode of the Clone Wars, but there's so many other episodes that I think are just stand out above this one.
Mhm.
But this viewing was enhanced by the fact that we just had Reign of Empire Mask of Fear by Alexander
Yes.
Freed come out recently. And one of the things that happened is that, that book took place after Revenge of the Sith. So Padmé Amidala is dead and gone, but her presence looms large, especially in the mind of Bail Organa, who thinks back about how much of an ally she was and reflects upon about how much she was kind of the glue that had that coalition of senators together, especially him and Mon Mothma. And to see those three on the same team, I mean, between the three of them, Mon Mothma had the smallest role. Wasn't even voiced by Genevieve O'Reilly for that matter. But you could see there was that friendship there. We saw in Mask of Fear the conversations or read, I should say, when Mon Mothma was getting interrogated about Bail, and she was asked, like, do you like him? And she's like, no, I don't. But they're colleagues. They work together. And those two didn't really have much in the way of moments outside of being in the same sphere as Padme in this episode. That's not to say things may have been different elsewhere, but I just couldn't help but think of that book and the things that Bail was thinking and going through as I watched this episode this time.
Oh, that's an excellent correlation, and kudos for bringing that up because I was thinking to myself about just the relationship with Padme and Bail and Padme and Mon Mothma, but I hadn't really thought about the connection to the book. I was thinking a little bit about Mon Mothma and her presence in Andor moving
Mhm.
forward into, what her gravitas and her presence is there, but glad you brought up the book because that's spot on for sure.
Yeah. And isn't it interesting with like this episode when we're getting into those three, again, focus on Mon Mothma and Bail for a second. This is them pre-insurgency
Mhm.
here. This is them being part of a team that's trying to find a way to bring an end to the Clone Wars, to end the violence, to allow diplomacy to resume. This is
Right.
before Bail's on a crusade to clear the name of the Jedi, and Mon Mothma was on a crusade to limit the power of the Emperor here. So it's just it's I think it would be fun in a couple years when that Reign of Empire trilogy is done to take this episode and some of the other episodes of the Clone Wars where Bail and Mon Mothma appear, and then Andor, add that into it and come up with this legacy of Bail Organa, Mon Mothma, Padme there. I mean, because they really are this primitive of characters from the Senate that were influential and really shaped so many things to come in Star Wars.
Mhm, mhm. Challenge accepted. I think we should do it for sure. And as you're talking about that too, it makes me think about how with Mon Mothma especially, she's quietly observing all of these things that are happening, all of this backstabbing within the senators themselves, how Palpatine is operating, what he just did to Satine and Mandalore, and so she's really getting a lot of that experience that leads her to believing that he is the monster, and
Mhm.
rightfully so.
Yeah. And so yeah, let's talk a little bit here about this project that they're all working together here, which is being led by Anaconda Far. And they I they say that, but really Padme is the figurehead for this movement here of ending the production of clones, which is interesting. When I started rewatching this episode for this discussion, again, this is an episode that just didn't stand out in my memory. And I think it's largely because of what we were just saying. uh, Ahsoka, Anakin, and Obi-Wan don't appear in it. And those are the big three of the Clone Wars when it comes down to it. If there's a big four, Padme is number four, or maybe
Mhm,
it's Rex. I'm not sure. There's a second tier of characters, and Padme is kind of on that tier. But uh, here, they've got this motion that they're going to try and end the production of clones to allow diplomacy to resume. Is this something that ever sounded like it would work to you?
As far as trying to stop the production of the clones?
The entire thing, which is we're going to stop production of clones, and that will mean we'll have to resort to diplomacy to come up with a resolution with the Separatists.
Well, it's interesting because even in Revenge of the Sith, Padme repeats that exact same line. It's
Mhm.
time for diplomacy to resume.
Mhm.
When she's talking to Anakin, you're closer to the Chancellor now than anyone. Talk to him and try, get diplomacy to resume. And so
Mhm.
it's an echo of that. Do I think that it ever would have necessarily worked? Probably not, because there's just way too many things that are, part of the machine, if you will.
Mhm.
And it's a great kind of, values thing for Padme. It's where she started with the Creationism Act, I think is what it was called, or the Military Creation Act. And so she was opposed to it from the very beginning. And she's trying to continue to have leverage with it now and just trying to find a different way to do it. However, it's to me, I almost think to myself, I get it. She doesn't want more clone troopers to be created, but how can she argue the fact that these clone troopers are the ones that are, at least right now, protecting her husband
Mhm.
and, all of the Jedi that she holds so dear, her friends, she knows Rex personally, all of these different types of things. So it's almost like, all right, Padme, I get it, but at the same time, you know, I don't know, there's just some questions that I would have for Padme, let's just put it that way.
Yeah, I guess for me, it is simply this. It's like you're in the middle of a war and you want your Senate to take up a bill to basically destroy your defenses or to limit the amount of defenses you got going on. That's not a wartime move. And I appreciate the logic, which is if we stop the creation of new clones, that's a big signal to the separatists that we want to talk, that we want to try and get this resolved, as opposed to creating material for a forever war at the end of the day here.
Mhm,
But I mean, how is that ever going to go over with the people? I mean, they Anaconda Farr and or Padme, one of them at the beginning of this episode is talking to a senator, and the senator is sympathetic and likes the idea of this, but he tells them, I can't do this. The optics on this are terrible. If, I can't vote to end the production of our defense. And then, Senator Bertoni, the Kaminoan from Camino, comes in, and she's not a likable character, but she accuses them of being separatists in this regard. And clearly they're not. But you could see, like, if this had gone on, how, like, in today's political climate, they would have been labeled as traitors and
mhm,
separatist sympathizers and the like. Like, this is like, why would you voluntarily cripple our side and give the separatists an advantage in this way?
mhm,
And
mhm,
so, at any rate, while I agree with their aims on getting diplomacy, this just seemed like such an idealistic move, which, hey, that's what Padme's known for, right? But
right.
the idea is like it's not practical, and I don't know like whatever chance of success this really had.
Mhm,
So
mhm. No, I agree. And again, to mirror what Dichi said, even Anakin says that to Padme as soon as she says, "Let diplomacy resume" to him, he says, "Now you're
mhm.
sounding like a separatist."
Indeed,
So,
indeed.
yep, same thing.
One of the things that came up here is and it's such a side hand comment, which is the we need to stop the manufacture of clones. Is that like the least looks dehumanizing way of talking about them?
Mhm,
Manufacturing them? I mean, I don't
mhm.
know how you would do it, but when you're talking, you manufacture battle droids. You don't manufacture people here.
Right.
But that is the terms the Senate was using for this, is that we are
Mhm,
going to stop the manufacture of clones. We're going to stop the manufacture of people to fight this war. And it's really sad. It's tragic in that regard because the Jedi come to know the clones as individuals. We see Yoda do it. Anakin, or Obi-Wan rather, kind of falters a few times with the way he talks about clones, but they're all friends with the commanders and the various clones that are serving underneath them. The Jedi, more than anybody else in the galaxy, recognize the individuality from one clone to the other here. But here it is, the Senate just kind of talking about them as material as opposed to people.
Mhm. It's true, and I'm glad you brought that up because it again, as you said, it dehumanizes the entire
Mhm.
process, but I think that that's partially the point
Oh yeah.
because then people, they don't attach as much compassion necessarily towards that production, quote unquote, because they're not humanizing it.
Yeah, and they talk out
Yeah.
of both sides of their mouths because one of the things that comes up is that if diplomacy resumes, they can stop all the killing. Well, who's the ones getting killed? It's the clones in
Right.
this. That's not to say that there aren't civilian casualties in all this. We've seen what's been happening on Mandalore throughout this series, but in out of one side of their mouth, they're talking about the clones as something that are being manufactured. Out of the other side of their mouth, they're talking about them as the tragedy of them being killed. Well, why'd you have to use clones then? I mean, just use
Mhm.
droids like the Separatists, like this proxy war that you've got going on. Both sides are quote unquote manufacturing their soldiers in this
Right.
dispute. So,
Right.
all right, well, let's return to some of the actual plot points of this episode, besides our musings here in the minutiae. But we have the murder of Anaconda Farr, and I remembered this after I saw it, but it was a bit shocking to see a dear friend of Padme's get killed off this way in this episode here. What did you think?
Mhm. Oh, yeah. I mean, Padme has definitely endured a lot in terms of everything that she saw as a queen of Naboo and all of the loss that she endured there, losing Qui-Gon, all of those types of things. And so to have someone that was her mentor literally drop dead in front of her, yeah, that was one of the big reasons why she decided to take this into her own hands. It was
Mhm.
personal. It wasn't just quote unquote business. And again, when we talk about Clone Wars being a kids show, this is another one of those moments where we need to pause and say, wow, this is really dealing with some very mature themes for sure.
Mhm. Yeah, it was surprising to me here because yeah, you're talking about mature themes are like that. This was a character that had the big redemption in season 1. He betrayed Padme because he didn't feel like the Republic was doing enough to help out Rhodia, and then she goes there, solves the problem, and then after she overcomes Viceroy Newt Gunray and the such, she gets more aid for Rhodia there, and so to lose him like this is a bit of a shocker here. But it leads us into the investigation, and this is where we're introduced to Lieutenant Tan Davi, who's voiced by Tom Kenny, who's more famous for his work as SpongeBob, which I've never actually seen. Have you?
What? Yes, we my kids grew up on SpongeBob. It's so funny because we quote so much of SpongeBob stuff
Oh
at
yeah,
our house.
yeah,
Oh yeah. All right. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, I've seen clips, but I've never actually sat down and watched an episode of SpongeBob. So big hole in my pop culture resume there. But at any rate, the featurette for this episode on StarWars.com focuses on Lieutenant Tan Davi, and Dave Filoni talks about this character, how they modeled him and his investigator droids after the Keystone Cop type of a thing, and he's got this odd shape. He's asymmetrical on both sides of his face, and the first time I heard him, I thought they brought Steve Buscemi in to do the voice of this because a
Yes.
bit of mannerisms like that. But he gets very irritated with Padme because she keeps sticking her nose in this investigation that he's running, and he wants her to butt out, let him do his job. On the one hand, I can appreciate that. There's procedure. We've all seen the police procedurals on television where you can screw up a crime scene, and you go talking to someone and you set them off that they might be a suspect if you don't do it right, whatever. And so I sympathize, but he's really not effective in this episode, and it's ultimately Padme that puts the whole thing together.
Oh yeah. He's that archetype by the book detective, very proud, rigid, dismissive. I mean, even of Palpatine, I thought to myself, dude, you're you're really like walking a line here, but also pompous. But of course, that's part of the trope, which I think is the point. But you've got a lot of nods. Like I was even thinking of things like Columbo. Do you remember
Uh-huh.
Columbo? He used
Oh
to
yeah,
kind of act that way too. He had like this swagger, very kind
he
of
was effective.
clipped.
That was the-
Yeah, yeah.
Which,
So, but it was a nice little diversion, I guess you could say, from the norm of what we see in Clone Wars. I think it was in, I don't know if it was in the featurette or if it was somewhere that I saw how they even styled his deputy droids kind of after the Keystone Cops,
yeah.
and they
Mhm.
almost like in his big old forehead kind of mimics that too. So I
Mhm.
thought that was a pretty fun little design choice.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, on the one hand, he's like never really given a chance to do his job because Padme is doing it so much quicker on this. But he is also thinking from the procedural way of doing this, which is that he's got evidence to present. He needs to follow down these leads. He's formulated his own theory, and here the amateurs are. They keep sticking their nose in his business. And so, on one hand, he gets my sympathy there, but again, it's ultimately Padme who puts two and two together and figures this all out. Of course, the natural suspects and everything are Senator Medici because one, he warned Padme about not making such unpatriotic speeches when she gave her initial presentation at the Senate. And then he admitted to having Anaconda followed on occasion, and he's the one that sent them to the docks, where them being Padme and Bale, and where they ended up getting attacked. And then the other main suspect is Senator Bertoni, the Kaminoan we've already talked about, whose people profit off of the continued production of the clones. And she barged into the celebration after Padme gave her speech. And right after she left, Anaconda died after ingesting the poison that we come to find out about here. Neither one of those two are particularly likable when it comes to, and then Medici ultimately ends up getting killed by the same assassin in this regard here. But did you have any thoughts on our suspects?
Well, Bertoni, when she picks up the cask that the drink is in, I'm assuming it's some sort of wine, and
Mm-hmm.
then sets it back down on the tray, I thought to myself, because I totally forgotten that Lola was the murderer in this whole thing. And I thought to myself, oh, when she set that down, she probably had some sort of poison on her fingers that or somehow transferred it over, and that's how the poison was administered. So I thought that, even though that obviously wasn't the case, having forgotten the final plot point of who actually performed the murders was a fun little red herring that made you think, oh, maybe that's how she did it.
It's funny, yeah, because that was how the Nymodians poisoned Padme, is what you just said. They rubbed the poison on the edge of her glass in that
Mhm.
episode when she was going back with what's his face, Rush Clovis, right?
Yep.
To
Yep.
the with that whole deal with the Mencken clan and the Trade Federation there, and they poisoned her glass that very way. The I got to tell you, the one thing I didn't remember this episode was that it was Lolo was the one that ended up killing Anaconda there. I just couldn't remember what the motive was and how they ended up figuring it out. But so, at any rate, it's funny. You put your knowledge and my knowledge together, and we would have had the whole episode. So,
We got the whole thing. Yes.
indeed. But at any rate, so what ends up happening is they get back into, I think it's Palpatine's chambers there, and Lieutenant Davi is going on about how they've discovered that the poison was engineered on Camino, and it was created so that it only affected Rhodians, and that's why when Anaconda drank it, he died, but nobody else did. And you can just see the light bulb go off above Padme's head, which is, well, wait a
Mhm.
minute. Senator Lolo was there, and she drank or didn't drink, and she's not dead in this situation. And so, she puts two and two together, and then basically Lolo outs herself by pulling a gun on Padme, and then she gets the drop on him and punches her out. And Lolo's motivation for all of this is that he brought their world into the war, and he briefly sided with the separatists, which did not improve anything. Which, okay, I mean, this is a harsh result. I mean, the appropriate thing is to go through whatever version of your planet's impeachment protocols might be. But,
Right.
what do you think about this motivation that she had?
Right. Well, I think she, again, like you said, it was this kind of momentary lapse in leadership and faithfulness to Rhodia, but Lolo just couldn't forgive it. And she saw him, I guess, as weak and unworthy and maybe even dangerous to lead Rhodia. But you're right,
Mhm.
she should have gone through the proper channels. So Lolo is a little unhinged.
Right.
That's for
Yeah.
sure.
Of course, we never see her again after this. But the episode concludes with the vote on this bill failing, and so the war is going to continue. They're going to continue the production of clones, and then you've got Palpatine coming to console Padme, and this surprises me. He flat out tells her that he supported this. He supported the aims of ending the clone war, the clone production, and turning to some sort of a diplomatic move, but he then goes on to say that this is for the best. After all, they have a duty to protect the people that are on the front lines the same way that they are protecting themselves. But if you rewind to this whole bit where Lolo gets outed as the traitor in all this, you can almost see like Palpatine lapping it up like
Oh,
this. It's
yeah.
just, it's like good, good. Let your hate flow
Exactly.
through you. And you could tell like, he must have gone into his private office and like done a fist pump about how excited he would have been about something about that. But I mean, did he come off as genuine at all to hear? I mean, this was creepy to me because it was just we all know as Star Wars fans that he's behind the Clone Wars and that the last thing he wants is an end to the fighting at this stage. His whole plan is reliant on the war waging on, dwindling the ranks of the Jedi, dwindling the resistance in the galaxy, so that ultimately when he takes control, he can send his forces out there and exert his will over the entire galaxy.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's easy for us to see because we know what happens and we
Uh-huh.
know what his motivations are. But one thing Palpatine is an expert at is fostering this loyalty through the things that he says and through the way that he is able to make you believe that he's on your side, especially for Padme, just because the fact that she's from his home planet and they've known
Mhm.
each other for so long and they've gone through quote unquote so much together. And what you just said as far as his we need them on the front lines to protect, and that's exactly what I was getting at when I was saying like Anakin.
Right.
He knows. I mean, come on, he knows. But I mean,
Mhm.
clearly he eventually wants to stop clone production, because he ended it once the Empire took over. But at this point, no.
Yeah, there's no army of
Yeah.
stormtroopers waiting in the wings. So I mean, he's
Right.
reliant on the clones, and besides the ones that are programmed with Order 66.
Mhm.
So he has to have them
Exactly.
around here. But yeah, all right. Well, that gets us through the episode. Do you have any other thoughts on this before we wrap things up?
Well, I have one little nitpick, and I
Okay.
thought to myself that, okay, well, maybe it's just this one scene, but it was throughout the whole thing. Padme's eye color was all wrong because she has dark brown eyes. And in this episode, it was more of like a lighter hazel,
Oh,
almost
okay.
greenish. So I'm wondering what the heck was going on with the colorization. But at any rate, like I said, it threw me off a little bit because I'm like, wait a second. Padme's eyes are not that color, but
If it was
again,
going to notice, it was going to
nitpicky.
be you on that. Yeah. Yeah. The
Of
other
course.
observation I would make is that, we mentioned that Duchess Satine appears here. And when I first saw her, that kind of threw me because she has no speaking role in all of this. And
Mhm.
Obi-Wan does not appear in any of this. And Mandalore is not any part of the discussion in all of this. And so my immediate thought is like, what is she doing here? And I guess the best explanation I can come up with is for this is that if she's not going to be on Mandalore, working with the likes of Padme and Mon Mothma to find a pacifist-like solution to everything is exactly what she would be doing.
Mhm.
So, but even then, but that's it. I mean, we see her in the background, kind of the side on one scene, but then never again in this episode. So, uh,
Right.
yeah, it was just I'd like to have understood a little bit more about her role and everything.
Yeah. How cool would it have been for Satine to actually survive instead of being killed at the hands of Darth Maul and going on and becoming even part of the rebellion? Because I could see her, you know, trying to get in with Mon Mothma and Bail eventually.
Oh yeah, sure. But alternatively, the fate that she has and the impact that it has on Obi-Wan, I think, is super powerful.
Oh,
So
for sure.
yeah. Okay. Well, then let's go ahead and start wrapping things up. Thank you all for joining us for this episode of Podcast Stardust and our discussion of the Clone Wars as we continue our rewatch. We hope you've enjoyed it. And we do this every Monday, at least while there isn't another current Star Wars show on Disney Plus. So if you want to get all of those upcoming episodes in our rewatch, make sure that you subscribe to the podcast on your podcatcher of choice. And if you've been enjoying our coverage, we'd greatly appreciate the favor of a 5-star rating or review on whatever podcatcher that you use, especially Apple Podcasts. And I cannot emphasize Apple Podcasts enough. That is the number one driver of algorithms across all platforms. So we could use some reviews, and would really appreciate it if you could help us out in that way. If you want to find more Podcast Artist content beyond what's going to be on your podcatcher, which is probably the last 1 to 300 episodes, head over to richesapp.com. You can find the entire back catalog of all previous 923 of them. Been doing this since 2019, so we got a lot under our belt under this 3 to 4 time a week format. So anyways, with all that said, Jay, I want to remind everybody where we can be found on social media and elsewhere across the internet.
Sure. We are definitely a one-stop shop. Very easy to remember. We are at Podcast Stardust on all of your socials, including Facebook and Instagram, YouTube, and YouTube Music. So you can hit us up with some comments. And if you're heading over to YouTube and YouTube Music, please make sure you subscribe and share those out with your friends as well. And once again, check out our Pinterest boards for all kinds of fun things, everything Star Wars related. And then if you need a new closet refresh or just would like some Podcast Artist swag, you can hit up the link in our show notes. That'll take you over to our TeePublic store. And if you do happen to get something, please snap a picture and post it on one of those socials because we'd love to see where those things end up out in the wild.
Okay. Upcoming on the show on Wednesday, we are going to have some fun with some Revenge of the Sith trivia. Actually, I should say I'm going to have some fun torturing Jay with some Revenge of the Sith trivia. And then on Friday, we are ending the week with some news discussion, assuming there is any. And if there's not, then we'll come up with something else to do. With all that having said, thanks for listening to episode 924 of Podcast Stardust, everyone. Have a great week. And until next time, may the Force